My name is Nadine Butts, and I'm the Director of TRIO Student Support Services. And I'd like to welcome you to our convocation on understanding the neurodivergent learner. We have a panel today of 3 adult experts and 3 adult students. This actually, one of our students is appearing through Teams. She's graduated in December. Audrey Dimmel is her name, and this was actually her brainchild. She came to us in TRIO and said, we really need to do something to help bring awareness of how the neurodivergent learner learns in a different way. And so from there, we took it and ended up with an opportunity to deliver this information through Convocation. So I would just like to open us in a moment of prayer and gratitude. So if you would please join me as you feel comfortable. In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Dear Heavenly Father, we just give you great thanks for the University of Mary, for the sisters that were courageous enough to forge the path for this beautiful institution. We give you thanks for the opportunity we have in this moment and for the brave and courageous students and experts that are going to share and enlighten our knowledge. Open our hearts and our minds as we continue to learn and build awareness to reach the needs of all our students. In your name we pray, amen. Okay, so I'm going to open up our panel with our very first slide is going to be just a brief introduction of our panel members. And so I'm thankful for Sarah here to help me go between the technology component and the facilitating component. So thank you, Sarah. So what I'd like to do is have each of our panel members introduce themselves. Their names are here. And really go to the next slide if I can. And it's the neurodivergent definition, and according to our source at the bottom, it describes people whose brains work differently than probably your typical learner. They have different strengths, there's different challenges, and what we want to hear today is the strengths and the challenges of how their brain sees the world and functions within it so that we can build an awareness to help create a supportive learning environment and a community to help support the brains that, and what we're seeing is more and more students from K-12 are coming to us with different learning styles, and so I think this awareness is really important as we prepare for our future learners as well. So the first question that we're going to go to, introduce yourselves please, and then briefly share as you feel comfortable your experience as either a neurodivergent learner or as an expert that works with neurodivergent learners. And maybe let's start here with Rose. So I'm going to go back to the slide on our participants. But we'll go to Rose, Teresa, and on down. And then Audrey, we'll end with you if you can hear me. So Rose, please take it away.
All right. Hi, my name is Rose. I have ADHD, or what used to be called ADD, but is now like ADHD, the inattentive type, basically ADD. I didn't get diagnosed till I was 18 years old. So basically, for most of my like K to 12, I was undiagnosed. I just sort of I had some struggles in school. I always enjoyed academics, but I really struggled to actually do my academics. My joke is that I'm academically inclined, but not inclined to actually do my academics. So yeah, I'm a sophomore here. I'm majoring in English. It's a lot of fun. It's pretty challenging, just getting homework done and such, but it's pretty great.
Hi, my name is Teresa Hayes. I have high-functioning autism, and I have a reading disability. I struggle with reading comprehension. I was diagnosed when I was 11 the first time. Before that, I really struggled. I was about to repeat 5th grade. Most people just assumed I was very lazy. So I was told that, and of course I acted out and such. And after that, they gave it a couple more years. In the 8th grade, I received some individual education, and that really helped me grow. And then when I turned 17, I got re-diagnosed with high-functioning autism and my learning disability.
So my name is Nicole Spots. I'm actually an alum here. I got my 4-year degree in elementary education, and then I ended up getting my doctorate in occupational therapy here. And I'm currently working in rural schools, excuse me, around kind of the Bismarck, Mandan area. My experience has actually been pretty positive, but I kind of attribute that to where I grew up. I grew up in a really rural, small town, so any of the adaptive strategies or any of the challenges that I was facing, almost everybody was willing to help assist in those areas. For example, the teacher wanted to hold me back in kindergarten because I couldn't do connect the dots. And my mom, that was just one of the things that I wasn't very good at. But then my mom did tons of things at home with me, where she did a lot of like kinesthetic learning with me, body movement type stuff, a lot of sand to know my B's and my D's. So overall, my experience has been positive. But on the flip side of that, you can talk to somebody who has the same diagnosis as me and has very negative experience in that area. So.
I'm Lynn Dodge. I am the coordinator for student accessibility services here. I'm a retired special education teacher. I used to run a middle school autism center, which was an education in and of itself. I had my first student on the autism spectrum in about 1995. And so she turned out to be an amazing student, most organized. And then I got my, I spent my last year in the classroom with 9 middle school boys on the spectrum, which was an experience. And thank God I had a student helper to help get everybody out along with my para. So I've had a lot of experience with many divergent learners. My son is dyslexic, so I've done it from both ends of the spectrum.
My name is Kim Marmon. I am the chair for the Department of Education here at the University of Mary and have been here, this is the start of my 12th year actually. Prior to this, I worked with students with disabilities in public and private settings. In the early childhood, elementary, middle, and high school settings, a lot of the students I worked with were students with ADHD, students with autism spectrum disorder. And so I've had a wide range of working with different individuals and providing supports and services to them to be able to be successful in that pre-K-12 environment. As of most recently, my husband was actually diagnosed with ADHD at the age of 44. And so experiencing it from the side of a family perspective is much different than working it from the perspective of being in an educational environment. And so there's a lot of different things that I've seen from the side of working with him at home and helping to support him and support the home environment as well. But it also looks a lot different when I'm here in the professional environment too. So I hope to share a variety of different experiences that I've had with you all as well.
And then Audrey.
All right. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Audrey Dimmel. I'm an alum here. That still feels weird to say. That was back in December that I was a student. But anyway, so I like to refer to what I'm working with as the trifecta: autism, ADHD, and anxiety. So, and you know, that trifecta has its strengths and but of course, in a world that wasn't designed with the way that I work in mind, it's also meant I've hit some unique obstacles in my time as a student. So with autism, I'm very inclined to learning and even into class participation, but I get burned out very easily from being around lots of people. Not anybody's fault. It just requires a lot more energy for me to socialize when I am, as it were, always translating every part of every interaction according to what is for me always going to be a foreign social order. And I get really stressed if I can't take time to myself to break from having to perform socially and recharge. And then if I can't do that, I start finding my energy stunted to even do anything else. Yeah, I came to realize eventually that if I was going to do my best, I needed my own room, my own space to come back to, and be able to rest for as long as I needed. So now with ADHD, my brain is also incredibly crowded, loud, and fast-paced all the time. I'm virtually unable to focus at will. My energy reserves are almost never so full that I can do more than just manage where my attention is at any given moment. So one of the most important things for me as a student, and I think we'll get into this, is like establishing a sense of accountability and regimen. So so those are the things that I've just needed as a student to like function with the way that I am. And I mean, as you can tell, because I'm an alum, the system works. We can do this. So.
Okay, our second question, from your experience, what are the most common misconceptions about neurodivergence in higher education? If you can talk about at college, university, your experience.
I can't talk about like everybody's experience, obviously. I can't talk about even like, I can't talk about like autism or dyslexia, but I know that with ADHD, really there are just misconceptions in the world, and that's kind of what you get at college too. Big misconception is people have an idea that everyone with ADHD is like a 5-year-old boy, and that ADHD and 5-year-old boy behaviors are the same thing. That is not true. Not everyone, obviously, like, not everyone is a boy, and not everyone is 5 years old. They think it's just like a kid's thing. They think you grow out of it, and it's fine. And because of that misconception, they also might believe that it's just 5-year-olds being 5-year-olds. And that's also not true. It is far more sort of, it is far more likely to be a lifelong struggle that hits basically every demographic of people. People believe that it's an excuse for bad behavior. It is not, or at least it shouldn't be. Those are some of the major ones.
I can also pull on that just what the world sees as one person. Like when you look at autism with a girl and a guy, people just usually assume it's a guy's diagnosis, when really like most girls are really underdiagnosed with autism. My own parents actually didn't think I had autism. They thought I was misdiagnosed until the second diagnosis came in. So when we look at it, like I said, getting diagnosis for a girl and a guy is just very different and such. So that's just been my like biggest experience with the difference. Yeah.
I think sometimes what I saw when working with practitioners, individuals that were working with students as well, is that a lot of people thought they were lazy because they could not actually complete the tasks that they were given. In fact, these individuals oftentimes are extremely brilliant, very bright. But what happens is their executive functioning skills sometimes are affected. So to plan, to organize, and actually execute is very challenging. And so that's where some of these supports come in that we'll talk about eventually, the importance of supports. I think it's Audrey that's online with us that was sharing about her brain is all over the place, right? And that's part of somebody that is an individual that's not neurodivergent, is helping to support them in organizing to help them complete what needs to be done. And then as Audrey shared too, that importance of being able to have time and space away from others to recharge. One of the individuals that I used to work with, he had ADHD and said, I have 3 times the amount of energy as you, but it takes me 3 times as long to complete a task because I cannot hyper-focus unless I find something extremely interesting.
I was going to say, I think the theory of mind, or in other words, being able to get outside your own way of thinking is really difficult. I know we had one student here who could not see the purpose of doing some assignments in his first year experience class. And really, it was a challenge for him to write about himself because he just didn't think that there was anything to say. And the other part was, I remember him talking to his residence director and saying, yeah, I like to have conversations, but I only like to talk about important things, not the other stuff. And so it's hard for them to see something from another person's perspective. And I think we have to help them understand that other people see things a little differently than they do, and to maybe take that time to help them understand what's going on. The other thing is, I actually had a student who had difficulty associating names and faces. And so sometimes when they say professor, it's literally because they can't remember your name. Or they know your face, but they don't know, they can't put the two together. So just understand that from that perspective, they're struggling, but they do know who you are.
Audrey, you're up.
I feel like, as far as, well, without going down too much of a rabbit hole here, I feel like neurodivergent representation in pop culture, which, by the way, has usually been done by people who are not neurodivergent, has not done us any favors. The stereotype that I've really seen across the board is that we're either one of two things. Either we're all Rain Man geniuses and we have to be we're too smart for this, so then the conclusion then is if we're struggling, it's because we're lazy or we don't care. And then there's the other side of that, which is that, like, oh, we have to be like this entirely separate pet project from the rest of our peers because we need so much help. And then if we succeed, that's entirely because of other people's help, none of our own effort, and people can pat themselves on the back for that. I haven't seen either of those at UMary, to be fair, but I have found myself on the receiving end of that kind of treatment before college, and I can tell you that was probably one of the biggest hindrances to me learning how to advocate for myself. So anyway, that's my own experience with like those kinds of misconceptions.
Because you're in higher ed and you're in college, that you know your learning style and you know your adaptive strategies, therefore you should be getting good grades and succeeding in college. I go back to, once again, so you move from your rural or just where you grew up in, where you kind of created those strategies and either did really well with them or did not, or maybe didn't have those strategies. And then you're moving, you're now on your own a little bit more. The people that you used to rely on, maybe some of your preferred teachers or even like your parents or friends that would help you through some of those things are no longer an option. And for me, so I was in rural, I graduated in 2015. And so we didn't do a lot of like online tests and quizzes. Well, I came to Mary and I had to learn how to navigate Canvas. And then within that, I had to do a lot of like online quizzes. And for me, my comprehension is about time and a half. So what you would do, I kind of need half more time to do that. And so online quizzes were really hard for me. And visually, actually, Dr. Marmon probably doesn't remember this, but she's the first person that I reached out to adapt an online quiz, because she would do a quiz where it would be like terms and then pull down boxes. And for me, that was really, really, really challenging to comprehend. So I went in and I talked to her real quick, and she's like, oh, that's totally fine. Come in my office at this time. And all she did is she just printed out a version of it. And then I could use like highlighters and, you know, cross and connect them and visually check them off that way. So I feel like that's another preconceived notion, is that just because we're in higher ed, like I tell people all the time, I have my doctorate, and they're like, you do, but you have dyslexia. And I'm like, yeah. And so I feel like that can kind of be a conception that people miss out on a little bit. So.
Thank you. That was very rich as far as a strategy for assessment, teaching, delivering, and assessing your learning. Okay. Next question. Okay. How influences, as far as in the classroom, and I know you mentioned some, requesting and using accommodations, managing time, and just self-advocating. Oftentimes as an instructor, as a professor, you don't know what you don't know. And so that self-advocacy is really helpful.
There's sort of two of these that I think I can speak to best. The first one is in the classroom. The biggest way it affects me is I don't know, like, necessarily when or how much I should be talking. And I tend to like over participate because I'm happy to be there. So that's always like a struggle. I'm never sure when to talk, and it tends to get a bit more difficult when I'm in a seminar style class as opposed to like a class where you raise your hand, because that's more like a conversation, but it isn't like a conversation just with like one person or even like a group of people. It's more like a guided conversation. So there's like different rules, and I don't know how to navigate that. I have to really like hold back and make sure that I'm letting other people talk. So that's just a challenge. And then with managing time and organizational tasks, I could not tell you, like if you tell me that I have to do a task, I would have a lot of difficulty telling you how much time that task is going to take. It's called time blindness. I really just could not tell you. So when it comes to, unless I've done it like 1,000 times and I know exactly like it's going to take 15 minutes because I've like looked at a clock, couldn't tell you. I also couldn't tell you how much time is passing. Like couldn't tell you if I've been in this chair for 10 minutes or 30 minutes. Could not tell you. But the way I manage that is I set alarms. I also have a planner. And it's a sort of an ADHD thing where people are constantly told to get a planner. And it never works because that's, you know, you can't cure ADHD with a planner. My strategy with the planner is that I am its master, it is not my master. As in, if I don't want to use it, it's not getting used. It is there simply to get me from point A to point B. It looks terrible. It's a sad book full of garbage, but it works.
Thank you.
In the classroom, sometimes, actually usually when I do an assignment or read for it, I think I understand, and then I go into the classroom and be like, oh my gosh, everyone understood this completely opposite than I did, and I probably submit the wrong thing to my professor. Yeah. And then sometimes like the professor will ask questions that came from the text, and like I did read it, but I couldn't really comprehend any of it. So usually when I'm in the classroom, I feel like a very dumb person. And I think that's very common with people who are struggling with reading. I'm going to put one's ability to self-advocate and using request and accommodation in the same boat. Because that is, when you request accommodations, you're doing a lot of the work. It's not a person who's making it, so someone is making the calls, Dr. Dodge makes some calls, but we have to go talk to the professor about what we need. They need to sign a paper, and we have to put in her schedule and all of that stuff. And when a professor doesn't understand that yet, and we have to be the person to explain it, or if they still don't understand, you still need the accommodations, you have to learn to step up and be able to advocate for yourself or know who to go to if that's just not working. And that, believe me, is terrifying because there is a power dynamic with your professors. Manage time and organizing tasks. I like to think I'm really good at it. Sometimes I'm not. I like to have my things planned out by the minute of the day. I don't know if any of you have seen my planner. It's really scary, maybe kind of like yours. But yeah, I like to do stuff on time. I hate when stuff is late. But one thing about me is I don't go to bed until my homework's done, and because it does take me 2 to 3 times as long as an average person to get my homework done, that can mean staying up to 3 to 4 a.m., and then I wake up very cranky the next day, and so managing time could be a lot better, but it's okay, well, what in my life can I drop out? And there's not a lot I can drop out, so I'm meeting these time requirements and such, and taking care of that myself.
We'll just touch a little bit on one's ability to self-advocate, because I actually just had this with one of my students who's, what is she, a 10th grader? I had to recently test her, and they have just suspected possible dyslexia when she just got tested. And she came to me, and she was good. She did all of her testing with me in the school, because you have to do a separate test in the school to qualify for OT services in the school. And then I had a conversation with her mom, and she said how mortified her daughter was about getting pulled out of classes and possibly getting different adaptive strategies in place in class. So just something to keep in mind that people that have disabilities, some of the strategies are different, and you can see that in the classroom. And some people can feel a lot of shame or embarrassment when even just going into the professors initially with a new professor you don't know, giving an accommodations, and it completely sets them out as an outlier just at the beginning. Not that that's true, but kind of a perception that I feel at least I did sometimes, was okay, now they kind of know. I don't want them looking at me all the time or always coming up and double checking on me. I don't want to be super different than everybody else. But even my high schoolers feel that I work with. So just something to kind of keep in mind.
One of the things that, I advocate for a lot is something called universal design. And a lot of times the accommodations you make for students with disabilities are good for everybody. For example, This is one of my friends had a son who was dyslexic, and when he went to college, he went up to the professor, and he said, "I'm entitled to a copy of your notes." Well, the professor ended up putting those notes out in front of the class because he said, "I can't do it just for you. I have to do it for everybody." Well, it turns out at the end of the semester, he had the highest grades he'd ever had. So that showed him that that kind of strategy that the student was asking for really benefited everybody in the class. So, you know, I advocate that people look at different ways to assess students. I've had instructors come to me and say, "Well, how do you think I ought to?" And I said, what's your goal? Do you want to know what they know, or do you want to know how fast they know it? And so based on that, you know, I can give you some ideas. I have a huge toolbox of strategies that I, you know, have learned even in the last 6 months, you know, working with some of the technology that I have, and how to get it to work better for students. And so I think, you know, we just have to never stop learning.
I'll add something just in regards to the organization piece that some of them have spoke on. My way of organizing is not always going to be beneficial for those that are neurodivergent learners. And so in my experiences with helping to support students to understand how to organize what is occurring on a day-to-day basis, I went through 3 or 4 different types of organization systems sometimes with students in order to find what works for them. And I think that's the beauty of all of us. We all learn differently. We all look at things differently. We organize differently. And so when working with individuals, even at this collegiate level, of finding what's going to work for that student and taking the time to serve the students like we should be doing here is incredibly important, because that's why, as a professor, I am here. But finding ways to help them in that classroom is incredibly important through organization.
Okay, Audrey, you're up.
All right. Well, I'm going to start with how my being neurodivergent influences my experience in the classroom. I know a lot of us, as we said, might struggle with verbal participation and prefer lecture-driven, note-taking classes. And sometimes I did too, but personally, I actually loved class discussions, because I think part of it is that there's no need for, it's a conversation with no need for small talk or an established relationship or rapport. You can just jump in and right away with your thoughts on the material. And I loved the freedom that offered me. And I loved hearing other people's perspectives as well. But, and I know a lot of autistic people like myself can often just make very quick reasoning and quick judgments on things very quickly. That was a lot of quicklies. Sometimes that made it difficult for me to talk to other people in those sorts of discussions, because if I couldn't reconcile someone else's point of view with something else I was more convinced of as true, then I would often shift from discussion to debate, and I can get animated really quickly in these sorts of discussions. And animated for me does not equal angry. Everything's still in good fun, but unfortunately there's no guarantee that my fellow students would realize that. So quick apologies to anyone here I may have alarmed or made uncomfortable, or maybe challenged to a duel once. So So anyway, there's always that kind of double-edged sword aspect to that classroom learning for me, because on the one hand, I really thrive in that environment, but on the other, it's one where I can really easily alienate myself from other people. All right. So with regard to accommodations, it's like a lot of us were saying earlier, it's never easy for anyone to ask for help. I think it's especially difficult for us for a couple of different reasons. One of course, the social and communication aspect of it. And I think some of us also touched on this next one, which is I think we have an increased sense of shame about what we need, because especially especially because some of us were like gifted kids before college, but even for those of us who weren't, it's easy to feel frustrated that we need help with what seems to come so naturally to our neurotypical peers. And so we might often feel like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Then also, once you have the accommodations that you need, you also have to make sure to use them and communicate with your professors about them. I struggled with this for my first couple of years here, when I felt like my life was already too busy without taking the time to learn how to use services like Glean or secure textbooks in audio format. To be fair, that is also actually a bear, but or like reserve the exam room. But I promise you there is always time, and any time that you take in order to succeed to your fullest potential is always worth it. Now, as for managing time and organizational tasks, I'll admit it up front. I straight up like can't really do that if I don't have help. So the best thing that I ever did for myself was start establishing a support network of people in Trio, my professors, the accommodations office, so that, and like just establishing a sense of accountability. I would meet with my Trio advisor weekly and just talk about like, okay, so this is what I've been doing over the past week. This is what I have coming up. How can I stay on track? How can I get back on track? And like, how can I manage when everything feels like it's a little too much, or if it's snowballing? So I always needed help with that. And this actually dovetails right into self-advocacy. So it's more than about accommodations. It's about setting yourself up for success in every way that you can. And the first step for that is just reach out to people. And I know that's easier said than done, but I promise you the first step is the hardest, and everything else will be easier after that. All of these people, these professors, the Trio people, they're all very nice, and they want to help you. They will go out of their way to help you. And then I would also say be open about your neurodivergence, at least with your support network. And I know this is scary for a lot of us. Some of us may have even had bad experiences with disclosing our diagnoses that can make that even harder. So if you need any help overcoming your fears of what people might think of you, this is a mindset shift that changed my life. Why feel ashamed of your diagnoses and the way that you're wired, when that stigma was created by society a millennia ago and has just recently begun to be addressed as outdated and wrong? Like, it's arbitrary and artificial. There's no actual reason for us to be ashamed. So anyway, those are my 2 cents on that.
Okay, next couple questions I'm going to put up there, and some of you have answered this already, but kind of look through them as far as barriers and how can we break them down, even just classroom, but also in the social component of a university setting, and even residence hall. And then how can instructors tailor teaching practices? You've mentioned a lot of it, but if there's anything more you want to touch on. If not, we can just go to the next couple of questions, but go for it. Rose is up.
I can talk about the barriers. Actually, I can answer both these questions. The barriers, I would say for ADHD, the biggest barriers beyond just like I can't focus or I struggle to focus are like ADHD comes, and we kind of touched on the shame thing earlier, but ADHD comes with some sort of special package of shame because it looks like to the outside person, and I'm not judging anyone for saying this, but it looks like bad behavior, so people treat it like bad behavior, and this is not like anyone's fault really, because obviously if it looks like bad behavior, you just sort of assume it is and you treat it how you should. I'm not saying people are mean necessarily, they're frustrated like everyone else is, but you get a lot more negative feedback over your life, especially in your early life. Like, hey, why didn't you do this? You're lazy, you're stupid, that sort of thing, or not necessarily stupid, but just lazy, inconsiderate, all that sort of stuff, and that builds up this like pile of shame, basically. And then, so you either think to yourself, I am bad at school, and I should just not go to college because I'm bad at it, it's not for me, or you think to yourself, I am here, but I don't really belong here, thus I have to be perfect, like imposter syndrome. And then for instructors better tailoring their teaching practices, my big thing is sometimes I can't like sit still. Just I get sort of restless. So allowing me to have like audiobooks or allowing me to like doodle during class, like I am not like I don't. I get distracted easily, but I also I focus better when I doodle. So allowing me to doodle during class or like use audiobooks instead of like reading the actual book is very helpful. Yeah.
I actually had kind of a similar experience. I was labeled as a very difficult child. I never came with the intention of hurting someone, but sometimes I would say something and I didn't know how that would impact someone. And I still struggle a little bit with that in college, but it's a lot better and I grew a lot more since I was in grade school and high school and such. And my parents always held me accountable. They knew why. They knew my intentions were not bad. They'd be like, no, Teresa, you're not supposed to say stuff like that. And you don't always have that here because people are either afraid to say something, but usually if someone gives off a face of oh shoot, I should have not said that. It's never the intention, but it happens. It does happen. So yeah, I usually come leaving a conversation thinking, okay, did I say anything that potentially could have hurt someone? It's true. Every conversation I have, I'm gonna leave this panel and be like, oh shoot, did I say something that I should have not said? It's gonna happen. Yeah.
Probably one of the best analogies I got from a student about what it's like to be on the spectrum is it's like when you're driving and you see the police car behind you, and you get hyped up, nervous and whatever. They live that 24/7. And think about that. Because they never know, their whole lifestyle is based on knowing what's going to happen. And life isn't like that. And some of us are more flexible and we learn to adapt. And it's harder for them to adapt. And I've known Teresa since she came here as a freshman, and to see the growth and the maturity and the self-advocacy that I've seen, it's because we are a family and we promote that. And I think that she has, really exemplified what we try to do here.
I'd like to add just a couple things in regards to the perspective of a classroom environment in some different things that we can look at and consider. I know Teresa mentioned just a little bit earlier how it is tough sometimes to hear from a professor exactly what needs to be done, and then she goes home sometimes and isn't sure how to do it. That is with a lot of our students too, that we may describe something and we move very quickly. I think in our courses, if you've ever taken a class from me, I tend to speak very quickly, and I go through my slides to try to get through content because I want to share everything with all my students that I know. I see some of you smiling because I've had you in classes. But it's incredibly important that we break down directions, also give visual directions for students. And that's something that can be helpful for all. I also think a lot of times students that I worked with, and I've watched a video over and over again from Richard Lavoie. He was a guru in regards to individuals with disabilities back in the early 2000s, about the importance of allowing processing time. 6 seconds is a long time, but to allow that processing time for the individual to think through what has actually been asked. A lot of times what happens is I might ask a question, a student answers it, and then I move on, and the student with a disability might raise their hand, and they're still trying to answer the first question because they haven't even been able to process the answer and the question that's being asked next. And so sometimes, I often say this in my courses, in the world of education, we have to sometimes slow down to speed up. And so slowing down to make sure that a student understands it, but then speeding up later once they do understand it can be incredibly important. I also think it's really important to understand too that a lot of our students that are neurodivergent learners, they have phenomenal long-term memory. But the short-term memory is what's tough, and that's why it's so important to include those visual directions to help with that short-term memory.
I can touch a little bit on teaching practices. If you just Google teaching practices for different learning types, you'll get hundreds of different ideas, and that's not even putting like disability in the search engine. Whether you have a disability or not, we all have different learning preferences. Some are visual, like I said, mine is like kinesthetic. Lucky for me, I wasn't that great at academics, but kinesthetic is like learning through body movements, so I was really good in sports then because I used muscle memory. And so there are tons of different things that you can do when you are teaching in the classroom. Like a really, really simple thing, it doesn't have to be big. You can put pictures on your slides when you are teaching. So instead of just a whole bunch of words, you can put pictures, because a lot of people, specifically me, I will look at, because I have a hard time comprehending like words, I'll look at the picture and then I will take the knowledge and the content that we're learning and I'll remember the picture, not necessarily the words, but I'll remember the picture, and it's just super easy then for me to then relay it to like do exams and that kind of stuff. So really simple things such as just putting a picture. It doesn't have to be on every slide, it could be on every other slide. Allowing your students that need movement breaks, because adults need movement breaks, to stand up in the back of the room. What are some other things? Hands-on learning activities. I know when I did my 4th degree in elementary ed, they did a lot of Post-its and group activities for movement breaks, and to try a different type of collaboration more in small groups where they would put up Post-its in the room and say, okay, now whoever drew like green and red, go into your groups, and then go ahead, we're going to do this assignment, and then come back. So you can easily differentiate it into those kinds of sections. So it doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It can be, but it doesn't have to be that elaborate, and it can take 10 minutes of your class time just to differentiate it a little bit for everybody's learning styles.
Well, the number one thing that I would advise professors to do to make learning environments as inclusive as possible is just to establish right out of the gate that you are someone the students can come to when they're struggling. In some of my toughest times, when I wasn't making it to class or I wasn't getting work turned in, there was nothing so helpful as when a professor reached out to me to tell me that they noticed and they wanted to help. Having like the professors let me know that like they weren't here to shame me or scare me straight, but help me get back on the right track, that meant the world to me. So just establishing that you're there to help, even if you kind of have to overstate it, because of course cognitively we already know that you're not out to get anyone, is probably the most important thing that you can do to make us feel seen and valued as students. So
Thank you. Okay, we just have a couple minutes. You might have to click twice. Yeah. Before we head on, are there any questions from the audience that we can answer before we conclude? Yes. Okay, so how will you support a colleague or a friend or classmate, rather not from an instructor perspective, that with time management, especially working in groups and stuff, I would imagine?
I've been in situations before where doing homework and other things in my life is going on, and I'm afraid that, thanks. I'm like usually afraid that it would affect the other person, whether it delays an event or something like that. So to be very upfront that you're understanding of that and ask what you could do actually just means the entire world to me.
I can add to that. If somebody says this is going to take me 15 minutes and you think it's going to take an hour, I honestly don't think that that's bossy to just be like, hey, I think that'll take a bit longer than you think. Because honestly, like, for me, I cannot tell you like how much time something's going to take. So if you tell me, hey, I think this is going to take longer, I will be like, thank you. This will help me like build into my schedule like what I need to do. So that's not bossy at all. I honestly, I would be perfectly fine with that. I don't know about everyone, but I'd be perfectly fine with somebody like, hey, I think that's going to take you like an hour.
the question was about how to support as a peer or in especially group situations. That was the question, right?
Correct, as a peer and classmate type setting.
All right. Well, one thing that I would that I would just advise people is to notice what it is that we need and then honor that, and then just treat it just the same as anyone else. Like if someone needs extra time, if someone needs like a little extra help with like managing task to task, if someone like is recording the lecture on their laptop, then like just notice that, but then treat it as no different than like a physics major having a calculator, because for us that's what the job calls for. And so just allow that to be welcome and also treated just as normally as what anyone else needs to be able to be doing to succeed. And then also just presume competence, trust that our ways of doing things are what work for us, and like trust that like we want the same thing as you do, and we're working towards the same goal. And like even if like we're working towards it differently, we're not trying to throw a wrench in other people's work. So just that understanding.
Okay, thank you. Just as we conclude, is there anything more you want to add? It is a university setting. We've talked a lot about the classroom and academics. Anything with res life, anything in that area?
All I gotta say is, if you see somebody and they're just a little bit, pardon, this is kind of a weird, maybe not the best word, but just a little bit like offbeat or odd, don't like write them off as just like, oh, that person's weird, I'm not gonna be friends with them. Like you know, obviously if they're being tactless or creepy, that's not okay. Like that's not neurodivergence, that's them being tactless or creepy. But if they're just a little weird, sorry, weird is a bad term, but if they're just a little offbeat, maybe don't like reject them out of the gate. Basically, don't judge a book by its cover.
I was wondering whether I should have said this or not, but when you make light of a disability, like, oh, I'm a little ADHD and you're just a little bouncy or just can't focus, or I'm autistic or whatever, it actually is very hurtful. And I've heard that from a lot of neurodivergent students, that just making light and jokes. And if you truly think you do have a disability, please do see sources and such, because like I said, making light of it is just very hurtful.
Audrey, anything to share on that?
All right. Well, one thing that from the neurodivergence side is that even like if like socialization is like a little bit more difficult for us, or we need like extra energy to like put into that, and then extra time to recharge afterwards, is like you can't have a life of only studies or you're going to burn out. And you need to have friends. That's not a distraction from school. That's a vital part of it. And they can also support you in close ways that your professors or your advisors maybe cannot. So those communities, those friend groups, those can be your rock. So some things that helped me find friends as a neurodivergent person is I found a lot of them through clubs, study groups, games. I really struggle with small talk, so meeting people at an event with an established agenda was helpful for me, because we didn't have to do the small talk. We could get right into what we'd come there to do, and we'd learn about each other and grow close through doing that. So I suppose approaching this from the other side is like just don't pressure people into like doing like the small talk or doing like the little hoops that are typically normal for like getting to know a person. Like don't be afraid to like get into like some bigger stuff. I mean, don't obviously like come on with like what's your deepest, darkest secrets, but like yeah, don't be afraid to like feel like, oh, we're skipping some steps. Wait, because that actually makes things easier for us to like get comfortable. So
I can't thank you enough, students and experts, for your time and your knowledge and your dedication and your courage. So this is super courageous, and I really admire you. So thank you on behalf of all of us.